Let's talk herd. Yeah, that vulnerability is such a powerful element, I think, of our relationship with horses, and just being able to be vulnerable. And because I suppose it is because they are big and powerful, and we tend to have set up a lot of ways of, almost anticipating that vulnerability and heading it off by controlling the horses in various ways. And it is quite powerful just to sort of take those layers away and just, get down to the basic, even down to not, putting your hand out to touch them. Because I think sometimes we do that just as a form of, keeping our space, and keeping them back a little bit. And it feels powerful always to me, just to be able to just stand and be relaxed and just allow them to really come into my space. And that does come up a lot in the horse world, this thing about keeping horses out of your space. And, and I find that really counterintuitive now. I mean, I know that's the way I was taught, and it's taken, years, I suppose, a lifetime of just understanding that that's not, it's not a very powerful approach. Powerful in terms of it's not a very connected approach. So yes, I suppose for people, just being in a field with horses at liberty is already quite it feels quite exposed for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. And for that very reason, a lot of the time we'll work over the fence. We won't be in the same space with them. To give everyone as much space as possible to just really settle and move in, if they want to, horse or client. But you're right, the vulnerability is there all the time, and it's very, very real around horses. I mean, I've been physically hurt by horses, and there's definitely fear in me still around certain interactions with horses, and I know a lot of people have that. But there's also this extra layer of what it means to be a human and really feel what we are feeling and feel safe to do that. And the lovely paradox in this is that once we can support our client to feel like that, then the horses really, really engage and really want to come very, very close and support the person, because for them that accessing that really the true emotions going on inside, and the true needs and desires, once that person accesses that, then they kind of come into a greater harmony and coherence. And then of course the horses absolutely love that. But I think what you were describing, that what we're taught and it's all a cognitive thing. It's like I think that there could be a danger here, and of course while there are some real dangers around being close and personal with horses, if that gets in the way, we're not paying attention again to what we're feeling, what's going on in the body, because the body and our heart and everything else might be saying, actually this feels really, really nice, and can I allow myself to feel that vulnerable and that intimate with another creature, and in the presence of a person. It's not just the horses there's a person there, so there's another layer of vulnerability again for them to work through.
Would you say that horses understand that we are people, and that we are we're not capable of being pushed around the way that they push each other around? And
I would say emphatically yes.
Would you say that that's something that you have to teach them?
I think there is an element of that, absolutely. Socialization for the horses and basic training. But I think most of them know that. I think the times when I've seen that the horse not having an awareness of that, is because they've had a really hesitate to say it, but a really bad deal from their own owner, and that's usually because the owner can't set boundaries themselves with the horse, so the horse hasn't been able to learn that about two-legged human beings and the differences. So definitely it comes to the upbringing of the horse and the socialization. But generally more switched on and more attuned horses are extremely aware and usually very careful around people. I've found that. I would say the horses that I've known and worked with who have had the least forcing, the least, pushing through their boundaries, and the most listening to, are the most conscientious and the most aware, even to the point of being, empathetic. And it reminds me of one horse that I visited, and I don't know why, he just sticks in my memory because he was and I don't know if it was because he was shod, and I haven't sort of been around horses that have been shod for a long time, and he was really clumsy and tripping, but he was always I always felt like he was about to stand on my feet, and he was kind of pushing into me, and I think it was just really because he just wasn't being listened to on any level, so he just wasn't aware of where he was putting his body. And so I think it's not even about teaching them anything, it's about just awareness of our own awareness, and being able to listen to them, that allows them to, it's almost like we become more visible to them. So I wanted to ask you, have you noticed if your horses seem to be able to see and feel some people more than others? Yes, definitely. Yeah. That's another theme that, I noticed, particularly working with the same people on a regular basis. There's a tendency, I think, for a lot of humans to, well, of course, we mask a lot of what's really going on inside, and maybe it's just the clients that I tend to draw to me as well, but they've had a tendency to have a real difficulty to let their presence be felt, and tend to be a little bit invisible, kind of shrinking away. All to do with lack of self-esteem and confidence and things that have happened to them out of necessity. They've had to be that way to get by. And it is very much like in those moments that they are invisible to the horse. The horse can't feel their presence. And the switch that happens, the change when it happens, is what we've been talking about, is when that person gets in touch with what they're feeling emotionally, what they're feeling inside. And because I work only with women, a lot of the time it's about an inability to access any power and any anger, for example. And of course that comes up a lot of the time in terms of, again, boundaries with the horses. You've got to have some energy and some presence to set the boundary clearly and effectively so the horse will feel it. But and I've had some people where the horses just won't respond, they won't engage, because that person is so, for want of a better word, shut down, switched off, find it really, really difficult to access what they are feeling. In those times the horses can't respond because they can't feel what they can't gauge what's going on with this person.
So how do you find a way through that?
So that's about doing the preparation work with the person, the talking, the accessing the body, accessing what the person's feeling in their body right in that moment, and then going through the layers of the body down to the emotional layer. And I also work in a heart-centered way. So we'll feel into the heart, we'll breathe into the heart, we'll ask the heart for a message, and it usually gives them something. And all of that, as well as doing some breathing, all of that helps to shift them into a more aligned position. And of course at the same time the horses, or even a horse, may be subtly working away in the background to help shift this person's physiology and emotional state. and that will be felt, you know, in their energy body and then in their physical body. So yeah, those are the things that's how I would do it. That's how I would help the client. And 9 times out of 10, it's about reaching that emotion, and there's usually an emotional release of some sort, often crying, but it might not be. It might be some other physical and emotional release, like a shaking or a kind of having to, you know, kind of make bigger movements or something.
It's amazing how these different, you know, therapies and different approaches really have very similar points to them. I remember I worked with a craniosacral therapist, and it was while I was training in that. And so I went to him, and I think he specialized in trauma and what was it? Polarity therapy, I think. And he always said that one of the stages is that emotional release, you know, that you get an emotion of some kind. And I've really noticed that as well, just in the energy work that I do. I remember a girl one time who came to see the horses, and she was lovely, and she was staying here, so she just kind of, you know, went to speak to them on her own, and she said to me, they're quite a wild herd, aren't they? They're not really used to people, or they don't really, you know, they're not that friendly with people, I think. I can't remember how she put it exactly. And I was kind of surprised at that. And then we did a session together, and she identified that she was really worried that she wouldn't be good enough to connect with them. And so that came out, that kind of was like a wall blocking her. And when that resolved, I can't remember every detail, but it was like she felt like she was on a kind of slide, and the horses were just pulling her towards them, and they were all over her. They were so like hugging her and kissing her and incredibly affectionate. And I was like, oh my God, it was such a lesson, because obviously she just wasn't really visible to them before. So it's a really fascinating work, and I love the way these different aspects come up. Again, you know, like the emotional one, I think is really, really important. You know, emotions that get sort of stuck in some way. So I want to ask you, why do you only work with women? Is that a choice that you made?
It is a choice, yeah. And it's to do with my own background, you know, my upbringing. I'm just not comfortable working with men. I did do some work with men in the early days.
Right.
But yeah, I'm not going to go into the details, but it's not a comfortable place for me to be. And I love working with women. That feels like that's my niche, that's my area. And as a woman myself, finding it difficult to be around and trust and feel safe with other women, you know, for me to be able to provide that for other women is a real gift for me, as well as hopefully for them, because I totally get it, and I totally understand that, you know, whether it's one-to-one or especially in groups, you know, groups of women can be a boiling pot, all kinds of things going on. But
it is true that with men, they have a very, I don't know if this is a generalization or just something that I've noticed, but the ones involved with horses, they either seem to be quite laid back, or they seem to have quite a heavy charge, like an ego around horses, and just either controlling them or, you know, monetizing them, and they tend to destabilize a lot of the time their clients. So I do find it quite challenging to interact with them. Yeah. I always find my ego coming up, so I think it's quite a
the thing I noticed when I did work with men in the early days was actually a bit what we've talked about already, about this real, but an even more marked difficulty with accessing their real emotions. So it was harder work. You know, you had to do a lot more to kind of help them get down, and some of them couldn't get down to that place at all. So yeah, I just found it too difficult, and and I want to work, you know, in a way that I'm enjoying it. So yeah. I mean, it reminds me of I try to avoid these things that are, you know, especially things on social media that I really don't agree with, or I don't feel a connection to in any way, because there doesn't seem to be much point in, you know, in sort of trying to understand them. But there's one particular advert, I think it was, that I saw recently about a competition horse being put out in a paddock, and he was all rugged up with his boots on, and he was like running up and down and panicking because he was on his own. And I think he was in a different place to what he was used to, and there was stuff going on outside. And this approach was about how he had to learn to be okay, like with any situation, including that. And I didn't really look into it, but I think the methodology was like that, or the technique was to make him move away and yield until he relaxed and was, you know, okay about being on his own. And and I just think, oh my God, like, I don't want to judge things, but it just feels like going so far down that road of like artificiality. I mean, a lot of people in the comments said things like, well, he's on his own for a start, you know, a horse is a herd animal. And I mean, we know all of that, but is it true that, and I don't even know why I'm talking about this, but I just wonder if maybe it's easy to slip into the, you know, just discounting people like that and just saying, well, they just absolutely don't get it at all. Or maybe he's right in some way that, you know, horses in that world, you know, can learn to be comfortable with that world. I don't know. Do you have any opinion? I mean, do you just avoid stuff like that? Yeah. Basically, yeah. I don't engage in anything like that online. Yeah. I mean, I'm just so opposite in terms of my views about horses, and you know, my whole thing is about, I mean, I think a lot of that is about misunderstanding of nature, basically, of basic biology and basic, you know, evolution and all of those things. But it's also so counterintuitive and so, you know, and it's just completely about what is in the best interests of the person in that moment. And unless you're in a, you know, a setting where you can really explore that, like a therapy room or a group session where you can explore that with that person, then, you know, social media is not the place to to have those kinds of in-depth conversations. But I tend to stay out of the regular equestrian world kind of altogether, quite honestly. I don't put my energy into engaging with things like that.
No, it is some, I mean, I do feel like I get into my, you know, my comfort zone. Like I have quite a, I mean, I think we all do. And I think social media makes that easier as well, that you stay in what resonates with you, which is great. But then sometimes it's a bit of a shock to see, you know, just the level of understanding. And you just, I just wonder if we're actually making as much of an impression as we might think we are. What do you feel about that? Do you feel that things are changing?
My sense is that yes, they are actually. It might seem like it's small changes and slow, but my sense, I mean, I've been on social media now for years and years, right from the very beginning, really. And I attract people mainly to my stuff who are going to be resonating at a deeper level. But I do notice I get some sort of general equestrians, let's call them, sort of dipping in and out. And they do seem quite receptive. But then at the same time, you know, the sort of in the people that I do come across on, let's say, regular equestrian facilities and in the regular equestrian world, there's no change at all, really. There might be a little bit of understanding that's come in, that they've filtered through from the natural horsemanship, but even a lot of that I don't think is anywhere near enough anyway. But it's interesting because I saw something online the other day, quite a famous trainer who was putting out a video saying why I now disagree with desensitizing horses. I used to promote it all the time, and I was thinking, for God's sake, you know, I've been saying for decades, you know, it's not about desensitizing horses. It's the absolute opposite, you know. And I just thought, and these are people who've got such high profiles, you know, hundreds of thousands of followers, and do these big clinics and so on, and you just, it feels like hitting your head against a brick wall some of the time. But, you know, eventually he got there, so I suppose that's good. And he's now telling his followers.
Yeah.
But I think that's the way of the world, you know, people with, But that's what it's like in every field, I think. You know, you get the people with the biggest clout and the biggest names and the money and so on, and they get to put out the teachings like the Pirellis of the world. And then sort of 10, 15 years later, people are going, actually, I'm not quite sure that was so hunky-dory for the horses.
Yeah.
Well, you've been quietly going, hello.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it always seems so obvious to me, the intention behind what someone's doing. I mean, maybe that's just because the more you become aware of yourself and your own intentions, the clearer, you know, it is the way other people behave and why they do what they do. And I suppose if somebody's main intention is to become successful, then that's what they're going to do, and it doesn't necessarily mean that there's that quality in what they do. Yeah, I've kind of lost that desire to have this following anymore. How do you feel about that?
Well, do you know, I don't think I ever really had it. And then when I put my book out, it just naturally started to happen. And for somebody who's a shy introvert, you know, that's been a real growing thing for me. Yeah. And I've kind of got a bit more used to it now because I put stuff out regularly. I write regularly. So I've had to work through that because that's been a big challenge for me.
Yeah.
But I kind of quite like it now. And then there's a part of me, I have this internal conflict. Oh, it's like, I want loads more followers, you know, and I want lots more money. And then I think, actually, how would I cope if I had 1 million followers? I'd probably freak out and disappear. You know, I don't think I would want that level of
that's true.
Visibility, because with that, in the day, you know, in the age of social media comes, oh my God, so much criticism and scrutiny, and you know, you don't put a foot wrong. Yeah, I do think that that our inner being and the universe, like that, everything kind of supports what we really do want, because we might think that we want something, but the reality of it wouldn't be the same. I think that's why it's important to appreciate where we are and what we have, and which isn't always easy to do. Yeah, for me, it's always about remembering the quality, not the quantity. So, you know, to receive an email or just a comment on something from somebody who just really, really values what you're saying, what you're doing, is just so, there's the reward, you know, it's quality. It's not hundreds and hundreds of people. You know, you've impacted somebody. That's so true. Yeah, where does that come from? Yeah, we've got this thing where it always has to be about the number, which is really, it doesn't make sense, does it? Why should it be? I don't even understand that in myself. And maybe it's a society thing that we've just become, you know, used to this idea that, you know, when you've got 12,000 followers, that, you know, that means that you are something. And I don't know where that comes from, because it is what you say is true. It's that one person, or I think for me, as I understand it, where that comes from, because I've explored this in myself, is about a nagging deficit inside, a longing to be appreciated and recognized. And it all goes back to childhood. It's all those unmet, deeply hungry needs inside of us that we try and fill up with more, whether it's stuff or people or money or whatever it is. And actually, when you start to get a grip on that yourself, like I was saying, the one really enriching interaction with somebody is so much more nourishing, rather than this numbers game. And I think it is a societal thing too. Absolutely. It's a cultural thing.
Definitely.
But I think it's down to our inner hunger, and most people don't even know about that, let alone address it. And I think, the society, sort of pushes us to a place of always wanting more, like an addictive kind of, got to fill up these hungers inside of ourselves.
And I do think that we have a natural, I don't know about the word natural, but we want to expand because that's who we are. That's why we're living this life, so that we grow and we can become more of a light. And I don't know how would you say that relates to this hunger? Would you say that that's a twisting of that, or that the hunger is a different thing? So I think there's something positive in that. We want to not necessarily improve ourselves, but just amplify everything, keep growing and keep becoming, rather than it being a dead end thing.
I mean, what I've learned on my own personal journey is that it's always the opposite of what you think it's going to be. You think that growing and success means accumulating these certain goals in life and certain things in life. And for me, it's not been about that at all. It's been about reversing an awful lot that wasn't right, and really going back to basics. Like now, one of the biggest pleasures I have every single day is to go into my woods nearby and go and commune with the trees and the weather and the sky and the earth. And that is like, and how many people actually do that on a daily basis? Rather than keep rushing to attain all these other things that they think they need. So for me, it's been about really absolutely simplifying and going back to basics.
That makes sense, actually, because when I think about the feelings, because I'm talking about the feeling, like just that inner desire, I suppose. And it does make sense what you say, that maybe when we become less connected to nature, then we assume, or we interpret that desire as wanting more things and more possessions and more money and more, whereas actually it is just that desire to connect. And that we have to maybe learn better how to replenish that. Because I feel exactly the same way. Whenever I feel lack, the best way is to just reconnect with the horses. And it's just there's just always this abundance and enoughness and oneness in their presence and the trees and everything like that. So maybe it's just getting back to the root vibration really in ourselves.
And I think it's the negative side, the shadow side of the way humans have developed, particularly in recent decades and centuries, where we've become just so much more disconnected from nature and the natural rhythms of life, and everything has become more disconnected, more technological, more cognitive oriented. I mean, the difference when I'm sitting in front of a computer, and that's where you get influenced all the time by this more, and then I step outside and it's like, I don't need anything. This is just, absolutely, I couldn't be happier,
Yeah.
And most people don't, they just, they get sucked into it really, really easily, and then end up very, very unhappy.
And it is very easy to have that artificial life these days. I mean, I think if I didn't have that element in my life of the outside and the animals, and I just can't imagine how I would cope with it, because it just, it's just so fulfilling.
Yeah. And it's balancing as well, it keeps the whole of us in balance, mind, body, and soul and spirit, rather than just mind. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's where that's where all of our issues have come from, probably becoming too intellectual and just developing that aspect so far. You had horses as a child, didn't you?
No, I did. We didn't have horses, but I had access to horses from about the age of 11 or 12.
Right.
Yeah.
How did it go? How did you progress through to what you do now, would you say? What was the thread through all of that?
Well, it certainly wasn't a linear progression, that's for sure. I mean, I started out in the traditional way that you do here with ponies and pony club and BHS and all of that. I did a little bit of competing, and I did enjoy it to a point, but I knew it wasn't for me, and I trained to be a riding instructor, and I knew that wasn't for me as well. And then I took a complete turn away from the horses and went and worked in inner cities with quite challenging populations.
Wow.
But then it was myself, it was my own well-being, mental, physical, emotional health that made me sort of stop and pause and reflect on everything. And during that I realised what was missing, the biggest thing that was missing, which was the horses, and started to find my way back, and then came at it from a completely different route by learning about this kind of work and learning about people like Linda Gahanov, and I didn't get my own horses until I think I was into my mid-30s before I owned my own horses. So
can you actually remember when you went back to them when you were older? Can you remember that first event that reminded you or took you back to them?
Yeah. Vividly. Yeah, I'd gone to stay with an old school friend of mine, and she had this pony, and when we were teenagers she kept her pony with the ponies I was looking after. So for a while we were riding together, and anyway, both grown up, she was married, got children, and I went to stay with her during this period of reflection and recovery. And she took me out to go and see her now elderly pony, and I got out of the car and the smell of horse shit hit me. And I breathed it in, and it was like it was this enormous sense of, oh my God, I've come home.
Wow.
I mean, I remember it vividly. I literally got out of the car, and this overwhelming smell of horses and stables and straw and muck and leather and all of those wonderful, wonderful smells. And I just felt like, oh, I'm home. This is what's been missing.
Yeah. Wow. It is amazing the way life just does that. And you went to America at one point, didn't you, in your training? And how did that go?
Oh, it was absolutely fantastic, but it was challenging as well. One of the most wonderful things was being amongst a group of not just the lovely horses, but the people who were open and welcoming. And I felt like for the first time I'd found my tribe, my community. I'd never ever felt like that. I never felt like I belonged and couldn't resonate with people. And then there I was in a group of people who we all were thinking very similarly, feeling, interested in the same things. But yeah, challenging at the same time, because you move through your own personal stuff that we've been talking about in a group setting. So, and up until that point, I hadn't really done any personal development or therapy. I've done small amounts, but that was the beginning, really. So yeah, lots of vulnerability, lots of revealing, and lots of healing.
Yeah. It's amazing how horses do that for us, isn't it? They just, I think because they provide such a surface area of just energetic awakening or sentience, they draw you in to yourself, and they really show you who you are. And you have to be quite stubborn, I think, to resist that. If you look at most people with horses over time, they do make quite an inner journey, and it's a real gift that they give us, I think. You mentioned earlier that women are often attracted to horses and what they represent. Why do you think that is? Like, what do you think it is about horses that we love so much?
There's so many things. I think they embody so much of what we really struggle to embody in ourselves. Obviously they're really incredibly beautiful, and but I think there's a personal layer, and I think there's a collective layer as well. The horses are there in our psyche. They've been part of us, not just in our physical history, but in our mythological history, and for so many years, and we all have that imprinted, in our psyche. And I think there's just, it's hard to kind of pinpoint what it is exactly with little girls and ponies. Why that?
Yeah,
I think that pull is like that for so many, but I do wonder, as I think about it, I do wonder whether it's like, well, you get this opportunity to be, like little girls aren't supposed to be. You get to mess around in mud and muck, and you come home stinking, and and all the things that are involved with horses, and you're outside and it's cold and it's wet.
Yeah.
So you get to be a kind of just a natural little person or an adult, rather than fitting into a kind of into
freedom.
A role. Yeah, freedom, absolutely. And then there's the whole thing around, the kind of the freedom, the spirit of freedom that they kind of embody as well. And that, I think, speaks to our soul, and that part of us that wants to just kind of fly and be beautiful and magnificent. And we struggle so much to actually be like that in our bodies and in our restricted little lives. And of course, women aren't supposed to be flamboyant and beautiful and, majestic and noticeable and all of those things. So I think there's a lot going on. There's a lot of opposites attracting, and souls kind of yearning, and the whole physical side of it as well.